It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where most people knew each other only by sight, not by name. The streets were lined with small houses, each one carrying its own little world inside. Children played outside during the day, chasing each other with laughter that echoed down the road. Parents hurried to work in the mornings, waving to each other before disappearing into their busy routines. At night, lights glowed warmly from windows. Families sat down for dinner and the sound of televisions filled the air. But at the very end of the street stood a modest old house that seemed different from the rest. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The paint on the walls had started to peel, and the wooden steps creaked every time someone stepped on them. The garden in the front yard was overgrown, with weeds taking the place of flowers that must have bloomed there years ago. For most neighbors, this house was just another part of the scenery, something they passed by every day without a second thought. Inside lived an elderly man. His name didn't matter much to the neighbors because most of them had never spoken to him. To them, he was simply the old man at the end of the street. He lived alone, and the silence in his home was so heavy that even the ticking of the old grandfather clock felt loud. Every day was nearly the same for him. He woke up early, not because he had somewhere to go, but because sleep rarely came easily. He would shuffle into the kitchen, make himself a small cup of tea, and sit by the window watching the world move on without him. He had lived in that house for many years, once filled with laughter and family. Once upon a time, there had been birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and the joyful chaos of children running around. But life had a way of changing. His wife had passed away years ago, and his children had grown up and moved to different cities, busy with their own lives. Letters and phone calls became less frequent with time until they nearly stopped altogether. He never blamed them. He understood that life moved fast. Still, the emptiness of the house was a heavy companion. The man often walked slowly around the rooms, touching old photographs that hung on the walls. In one frame, his wife smiled at him with the warmth that had once lit up his world. In another, his children stood proudly in their school uniforms. These memories were treasures, but they also reminded him of everything he had lost. The house carried echoes of voices that no longer filled the air. On most days, he went unnoticed. Neighbors saw him only sometimes, when he would step outside to check his mailbox or sit on the porch in the evening. They might nod politely, but few ever stopped to talk. It wasn't that they were unkind, but everyone seemed too busy, too wrapped up in their own lives to notice how lonely he really was. This particular day felt no different to him. The sun rose slowly, shining through his curtains, and the morning birds chirped outside. Yet inside the house it was still and heavy. He shuffled to the kitchen, boiled water, and poured it into a chipped cup. As he sat by the window sipping his tea, he watched children running down the street on their way to school, their laughter spilling into the air. Parents called after them, reminding them to be careful, and then the road grew quieter again. The man sighed softly. He wasn't bitter, just weary. Birthdays, holidays, and special days had long since become ordinary. For him, each day blended into the next, marked only by the setting and rising of the sun. There was no one to ask how he was feeling, no one to share a meal with, no one to tell stories to. The silence seemed to stretch endlessly. As the afternoon sun warmed the old house, he found himself walking into the dining room. There on the table lay a small cake he had bought for himself from the local bakery. It wasn't much, just a simple cake with plain icing and a single candle waiting to be lit. It was his birthday. No one else knew, and no one else had called to ask. For years he had celebrated alone, convincing himself that it was just another day. But deep down, every birthday reminded him of the emptiness that had grown in his life. He set the cake on the table carefully and looked at it for a long moment. His eyes filled with memories of past birthdays, when the table had been surrounded by laughter, gifts, and cheerful voices singing for him. Now the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Though his heart felt heavy, he still lit the candle. The flame flickered softly, dancing as though it was the only guest at his small party. He whispered a wish to himself, though he wasn't sure what he wished for anymore. Maybe just one more day of feeling less alone, maybe just one moment of connection. The old man's birthday arrived quietly, without fanfare, without phone calls, and without the warmth of company. To the outside world, it was just another ordinary day. Children rushed to school, neighbors went to work, and cars came and went on the street. But inside that small weathered house at the very end of the lane, something significant was being silently remembered. It was the day he had been born many decades ago, a day that once meant celebrations, gifts, and laughter. Now it felt more like a reminder of how alone he had become. He had prepared himself for this day the way he had done in recent years, with small gestures of self-care that tried to fill the emptiness. He had visited the local bakery earlier in the week and picked out a simple cake. It was a round sponge cake, covered in plain white icing with a faint swirl across the top. Nothing fancy, nothing written on it, no decorations, and just a cake meant for one person. He had wrapped it carefully in its box, carrying it home with slow, steady steps, as though it was something fragile and precious. And to him it was. As evening approached, he set the cake gently on his old wooden dining table. The table itself was scarred with marks from the past, scratches from cutlery, stains from spilled drinks, and dents from the laughter-filled dinners he used to host. Once, long ago, this table had been the center of celebration. His wife had decorated it with flowers and bright plates, and his children had leaned across it arguing over slices of cake, blowing out candles and singing with full voices. But now the table felt too large, too empty, and far too quiet. He placed a single candle in the middle of the cake. His hands trembled slightly as he lit it, not from weakness but from the weight of memory pressing down on him. The tiny flame flickered in the stillness of the room, casting long shadows on the walls. It was a fragile kind of light, almost hesitant, but to him it looked like the only bit of life in the room. The old man sat down at the table and stared at the glowing candle. His eyes softened, and for a moment he saw the ghosts of the past sitting with him. He could almost hear his wife's laughter, the cheerful voices of his children singing happy birthday, and the clinking of glasses raised in a toast. His lips curved into a faint smile, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. The voices faded back into silence, leaving him alone with nothing but the ticking of the clock. Birthdays were supposed to be special. For most people, they meant being surrounded by love, hearing their name spoken with joy and feeling appreciated. For him, however, birthdays had turned into reminders of absence, reminders that no one was there to remember. He sighed softly and whispered to himself, "Another year." There was no reply. Still, he closed his eyes and made a small wish, though he no longer believed in wishes. He didn't ask for riches or health or even more years. He simply wished for company, someone to sit across the table from him, someone to listen, someone to make him feel less invisible. He blew out the candle, and the room grew dim again. A wisp of smoke curled upward, disappearing into the still air. The old man cut himself a small slice of cake and ate slowly. The sweetness lingered on his tongue, but the taste was bittersweet, carrying the weight of memories. Each bite felt heavier than the last, because it wasn't just cake he was eating. It was loneliness. It was silence. It was the empty space where love should have been. After finishing, he carefully wrapped the rest of the cake and placed it back in the kitchen. He didn't need much. For him, food was no longer about celebration. It was just another task, a routine that kept him going. Outside, the world seemed full of life. The sound of children's laughter echoed faintly through the windows. A car horn honked in the distance. A dog barked at a passing cat. All these noises reminded him of the life continuing around him, a life he felt separated from, as though he lived behind an invisible wall that kept joy on one side and left him stranded on the other. The night slowly approached, and the house remained as quiet as ever. Outside, the neighborhood carried on with its usual noise and rhythm. Inside, the man sat at his table, staring at the glowing candle before blowing it out. A wisp of smoke curled into the air, and with it another year of his life quietly passed. Little did he know, someone had noticed him that evening. Someone small, curious, and full of kindness, and that single observation was about to change everything. He walked slowly to his favorite chair by the window and sat down. The house was quiet again, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that joined him. He looked out at the street, at the lights turning on in the neighbors' homes. He could see families gathering for dinner, silhouettes moving back and forth across their kitchens. He imagined the warmth of conversations, the laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the smell of food filling the air. For a moment, he felt like an outsider peeking into a world he no longer belonged to. Yet something different happened that night. As he sat there in his chair, lost in thought, he noticed movement across the street. A little girl stood by her window staring at him curiously. She was small, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with a round face and curious eyes. She had seen him before, but never like this, sitting alone with a faint sadness etched across his features. She tilted her head slightly as though wondering why he looked so lonely. The old man noticed her gaze and quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. But the little girl didn't stop watching. She pressed her small hands against the window, her innocent eyes full of questions. In her young heart, she didn't yet understand the weight of loneliness, but she recognized something wasn't right. She felt in her own way that he needed someone. The old man didn't know it yet. But this small observation, this tiny moment of being noticed by someone, was the first step toward a change he could never have imagined. He finished his tea, stood up slowly, and prepared to end the night as he always did, in silence. But across the street, a little girl's mind was already turning, and her heart was already planning something that would make his next day unlike any other. That night, while the elderly man put away his small cake and sat in his chair with the lights dim, the little girl across the street couldn't stop thinking about him. She had seen him before, shuffling slowly to his mailbox, watering the front garden half-heartedly, or sitting by the window with a faraway look in his eyes. But tonight was different. Tonight she had seen the flicker of a candle on a cake. A birthday, and he had been all alone. Children notice things adults often miss. They see details that others overlook because they aren't too busy, too distracted, or too hurried. The girl's name was Lily, and she was only 8 years old, but she had the kind of heart that carried more warmth than most people twice her age. She had a habit of asking questions, sometimes simple, sometimes deep. And when she saw the lonely old man blowing out his candle with no one to clap, cheer, or sing for him, one question kept repeating in her little mind. Why is no one with him? As she lay in bed that night, she asked her mother, "Mom, who lives in that house at the end of the street?" Her mother looked up from folding clothes. "Oh, that's Mr. Harris. He's lived there for many years." "Does he have a family?" Lily asked curiously. Her mother hesitated, then smiled softly. "He did, a long time ago. His wife passed away and his children live far away now. He's old, sweetheart, and spends most of his time at home." Lily's small eyebrows furrowed. She couldn't imagine a birthday without balloons, without laughter, without someone to hug you and tell you that you mattered. She thought of her own birthdays filled with friends, cake, and the warmth of her family singing for her. The idea that someone could celebrate alone and then with no one even remembering made her chest tighten. "Mom," she whispered. "He looked so lonely." Her mother stroked her hair and nodded. "Yes, darling, some people are." But Lily couldn't let it go. That night, while the world outside her window quieted down, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the old man. She remembered the way the candle glowed faintly on his cake, the way he sat still in his chair, and how his eyes seemed to hold stories no one was listening to anymore. The next day, Lily woke up with an idea buzzing in her mind. It was Saturday, which meant no school, and she had time. She decided she was going to do something about Mr. Harris. At breakfast, she told her parents, "I want to go to Mr. Harris's house." Her father raised his eyebrows. "And why is that?" "Because he was all alone on his birthday," she explained seriously. "I saw him. He had a cake and a candle, but no one was there. No one sang to him." "That's not right. Everyone should have someone on their birthday." Her parents exchanged a surprised glance. Her father chuckled softly, but her mother's eyes softened. "That's very kind of you, Lily, but you can't just walk into someone's house." "I won't just walk in," Lily promised. "I'll knock. I'll ask if I can join him. Just for dinner or cake, please. He needs someone." Her mother hesitated again, unsure if it was appropriate, but there was something in Lily's determination that couldn't be ignored. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but only if he says yes, and only for a short time." That was all the permission Lily needed. Later that afternoon, she dressed in her favorite yellow dress, the one with little flowers printed on it, and tied her hair into 2 neat braids. She wanted to look cheerful like sunshine, because she thought maybe Mr. Harris needed a bit of sunshine in his life. With small but confident steps, she crossed the street, clutching a little handmade card she had quickly drawn. On it, she had written in big letters, "Happy birthday, Mr. Harris," and surrounded the words with colorful hearts and stars. It wasn't perfect. The lines were crooked, and the colors didn't stay inside the shapes. but it was filled with genuine love. When she reached his porch, the wooden steps groaned under her weight. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Her little hand tapped 3 quick knocks that echoed through the quiet house. Inside, Mr. Harris sat in his chair, startled. He rarely had visitors, and the sound of knocking at his door was almost foreign to him. He slowly rose to his feet, leaning on his cane, and shuffled toward the door. When he opened it, he was met with the sight of a small girl in a yellow dress, holding a colorful card and smiling up at him with innocent eyes. "Hello," she said softly but brightly. "Are you Mr. Harris?" "Yes," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. "And who might you be?" "I'm Lily. I live across the street." She held out the card with both hands. "I saw your cake yesterday. It was your birthday, right? I made this for you." Mr. Harris blinked in surprise, his eyes filling with sudden warmth he hadn't felt in years. He took the card with trembling hands and stared at it for a long moment. No one had given him a card in so long. The colorful scribbles looked more precious than gold. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick. "That's very kind of you," Lily beamed. "Can I come in? I thought maybe we could eat some cake together. You shouldn't have to be alone on your birthday." For a moment, Mr. Harris didn't know what to say. His heart ached with both joy and hesitation. No one had ever shown up at his door like this before. But as he looked into Lily's hopeful eyes, he felt something stir inside him, a warmth he thought had long since faded. "Of course," he said at last, stepping aside. "Come in." And with that simple act, a bond began, one that would change both of their lives forever. Lily stepped into the old man's house with a kind of curiosity only a child could have. The moment she crossed the threshold, she noticed how different it felt from her own home. The air smelled faintly of old wood and tea leaves. The furniture looked worn but carefully kept, each piece telling its own silent story. The living room was quiet, with neatly stacked books on a shelf and family photos hanging on the wall, though the colors in the pictures had begun to fade with time. She paused for a moment, her eyes landing on one photograph in particular, a smiling woman standing next to a younger version of Mr. Harris with 2 children laughing at their sides. Lily tilted her head. She wanted to ask about it, but she stayed quiet, sensing that it might be too private. Instead, she turned back to him and smiled. Mr. Harris watched her with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. It had been so long since anyone had visited, let alone a child. He felt almost nervous, as though he had forgotten how to be a host. But there she was, standing in his hallway with a yellow dress and 2 bright braids filling his house with a light that hadn't been there in years. "Would you like some cake?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Yes, please," Lily answered eagerly, her eyes lighting up. "But only if you eat with me. It has to be together." He chuckled, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in such a long time. "Of course," he said. "Together." They walked into the dining room where the cake still waited on the table. The old man carefully unwrapped it, cutting 2 generous slices. He placed one on a small plate for Lily and another for himself. The knife clinked softly against the porcelain, breaking the silence that usually filled the house. As Lily took her first bite, her eyes widened. "This is so good," she exclaimed with the pure excitement only a child could have. Mr. Harris smiled faintly as he watched her. "I'm glad you like it. I wasn't sure it was any good." "It's amazing," Lily assured him, swinging her legs under the chair. "You should have had a big party with balloons and songs and everything. That's what birthdays are supposed to be like." He looked down at his cake, his fork pausing. "I used to have those. A long time ago." His voice trembled slightly, but then he glanced at her and forced a smile. "But tonight feels just as special." Lily grinned, satisfied with his answer, and continued eating happily. After a few bites, she put her fork down and looked at him seriously. "Why were you alone yesterday?" The question caught him off guard. Adults usually tiptoed around such things, avoiding the subject of loneliness or loss. But children didn't. They asked what was in their hearts without fear. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Because life changes, Lily. People grow up, they move away, and sometimes the people you love most, they're not here anymore." Lily frowned. "That's sad." "Yes," he admitted quietly. "It is." There was a long pause. The old man expected the silence to feel heavy, like it usually did. But instead it felt lighter because he wasn't sitting in it alone. "I think you need a friend," Lily said suddenly, her small voice steady. He blinked. startled. A friend? Yes, she said firmly. Everyone needs at least one friend. Even grown-ups. Even old people. And I think I could be yours. For the first time in many years, Mr. Harris felt tears sting his eyes. No one had offered him something so simple, so profound in such a long time. He tried to clear his throat and nodded. I would like that very much, Lily. They continued eating, but this time the silence was filled with warmth. Lily chattered about her school, her friends, and the drawings she loved to make. She told him about her favorite teacher, her favorite food, and even the silly argument she had with her brother over who got the bigger slice of pizza last week. Mr. Harris listened intently, smiling more than he had in months. Every word from her lips reminded him of the sound of life, vibrant, messy, and beautiful. When she finished her slice of cake, she looked at him curiously. Do you have any stories? From when you were little? The old man hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone had asked him that. But slowly he began to speak. He told her about growing up in the countryside where he used to climb trees and race his friends down dirt roads. He told her about his first bicycle, the one he fell off of 5 times before learning to ride. He even told her about the time he got in trouble for sneaking into the neighbor's orchard to steal apples. Lily laughed at each story, her eyes wide with wonder. You were just like me, she exclaimed. He chuckled again, a genuine full laugh this time. Yes, just like you. Hours seemed to slip by without either of them noticing. What was supposed to be a short visit turned into an evening of laughter, cake, and stories. The lonely house that usually echoed with silence was now alive with voices, the kind that carried warmth into every corner. Finally, when the sky outside turned dark, Lily's mother came to the door to fetch her. She thanked Mr. Harris for being kind to her daughter, and he, in turn, thanked her quietly for allowing Lily to visit. As Lily left, she turned back at the door and waved. Don't be lonely anymore, Mr. Harris, she said sweetly, because now you have me. The old man stood at the door long after she had gone, holding her little card in his hand. His heart, which had felt so empty the night before, now carried a warmth he hadn't known in years. He looked at the card again, the words Happy Birthday shining with childish scribbles, and whispered to himself, Best birthday ever. He didn't know it then, but that one evening, that one small act of kindness would become the last birthday he would ever celebrate, and it would be the one he cherished most. The next morning, Mr. Harris woke up feeling strangely different. For years, his days had been heavy, weighed down by the silence of his house and the routine of loneliness. But now when he opened his eyes, there was something light in his chest, almost like a spark he thought had burned out long ago. He shuffled into the kitchen, poured himself a cup of tea, and found his gaze drifting to the little card Lily had given him the night before. It sat proudly on the table, its colorful scribbles brighter than anything else in the room. He picked it up and ran his fingers over the paper, smiling. The childish handwriting and crooked stars were imperfect, yet it was the most beautiful gift he had received in decades. He whispered to himself, A friend. The word felt new and strange on his lips, but comforting at the same time. Across the street, Lily was just as excited. She woke up early, dressed quickly, and ran downstairs. Her mother raised an eyebrow as she found her daughter already putting on her shoes. Where are you off to so early? Her mother asked. To see Mr. Harris, Lily replied eagerly. He's my friend now. I don't want him to be lonely. Her mother smiled softly, touched by her daughter's determination. All right, but don't stay too long. Remember, he's an old man. He needs rest too. Lily nodded quickly, though in her young mind she believed friendship was exactly the kind of rest Mr. Harris needed. She darted across the street, her braids bouncing behind her, and knocked on his door with her small hand. When Mr. Harris opened the door, he was surprised to see her again so soon. Lily, he exclaimed, though his voice carried joy rather than hesitation. Good morning, she chirped. Can I come in? I brought something. She held up a small box of crayons and a stack of paper. We can draw together. I'll teach you how to make flowers and stars. He chuckled warmly. I'm not much of an artist, you know. That's okay, Lily said, brushing past him confidently into the living room. I'll help you. And so that morning turned into something magical. Lily spread her crayons across the table, and together they drew pictures, hers full of bright colors and wild imagination, his simple and shaky but filled with effort. She drew herself standing with a tall old man under a big sun, and when she showed him, she giggled. "That's you and me. We look like best friends." He smiled at the picture, feeling tears threaten his eyes again. "Yes, we do." As the days went by, their visits became routine. Sometimes Lily came in the morning, sometimes in the afternoons after school. She brought stories about her classmates, about the silly jokes her teacher told, and even about the stray cat she was trying to feed near her yard. Mr. Harris listened to every word with deep interest, as though her stories were treasures. In return, he began sharing more of his own. He told her about his childhood adventures, about the games he played before televisions and phones existed. He told her about meeting his wife at a dance hall, how nervous he had been to ask her to dance and how she had laughed at his clumsy steps. Lily listened wide-eyed, fascinated by the idea that the quiet old man had once been young, bold, and full of dreams. One afternoon, Lily noticed an old wooden piano tucked in the corner of his living room, covered in dust. "Do you play this?" she asked curiously. "I used to," he said, his eyes softening. "My wife played it more than I did. She had the most beautiful hands for music. Can you show me?" she asked eagerly. Hesitant, he sat down on the bench and pressed a few keys. The sound was rusty, some notes out of tune, but the melody stirred something deep inside him. Lily clapped her hands in delight. "That's so pretty. Teach me." And so, little by little, he showed her simple notes, her small fingers fumbling across the keys while giggling at her mistakes. The house, once so quiet, now echoed with the uneven yet joyful sound of music and laughter. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing day. For Mr. Harris, it was as if the years of loneliness had melted away, replaced by the brightness of a child who treated him not as an old man, but as a friend. For Lily, it was like finding a grandfather she never had, someone who listened patiently and always smiled at her stories. Neighbors began to notice too. They saw Lily skipping happily into the old man's house and later leaving with a smile on her face and sometimes a cookie in her hand. Whispers spread quietly among them, curiosity mixed with admiration. Some said it was unusual, others called it heartwarming, but all agreed that something had changed in Mr. Harris's life. One evening, as Lily was leaving, she turned to him and said, "I think your house was sad before, but now it's happy." Mr. Harris looked around the room, at the crayons scattered on the table, at the piano bench where tiny fingerprints still rested, and at the bright little card that still stood proudly on the shelf. For the first time in years, he felt that his home was alive again. He looked at Lily and nodded with a smile. "Yes, Lily, you've brought happiness back." That night, when he sat alone in his chair, he didn't feel lonely. He felt full of stories, laughter, and new memories. He thought about how life had surprised him. Just when he believed his last years would be filled with nothing but silence, a little girl had walked through his door and reminded him what it felt like to live. And though neither of them could have known it, those simple days of companionship were not just ordinary moments. They were the kind of moments that would stay etched in memory forever. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the quiet neighborhood in soft shades of gold. Birds chirped from the trees, and the world seemed as calm as ever. Inside his small house, Mr. Harris sat by the window with his morning tea, a ritual he never missed. But today felt different. He had woken with a warmth in his heart, a lingering joy from the laughter that had filled his home the day before. He could still hear Lily's giggles echoing faintly in the corners of the room, still see her crayons scattered across the table, still feel the faint touch of her small hands on the piano keys. For the first time in years, he had gone to bed smiling. His heart had felt lighter, as though the burden of silence had been lifted. It was as if he had been given a new purpose, something to look forward to. He even caught himself humming an old tune as he sipped his tea. Across the street, Lily stirred awake too. She stretched, her braids messy from sleep, and immediately thought of her new friend. She was already planning what picture she would draw for him that day. Maybe a picture of them sitting by the piano, or one of the gardens she wanted to help him fix. To her, visiting Mr. Harris had quickly become her favorite part of the day. The neighborhood seemed perfectly ordinary, perfectly quiet. But then, the sound came. Sirens. At first, faint in the distance, and a wailing cry that grew louder as it neared the end of the street. Dogs began to bark. Curtains and windows were pulled back as curious neighbors peeked outside. The sound was unusual here where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. And then the sight. A police car turned into the lane, its flashing lights bouncing against the houses. It slowed near the very end of the street, near Mr. Harris's house. People stepped onto their porches, whispering, watching. The car came to a stop right in front of the small, weathered house that had been ignored by many for years. Lily pressed her face against the glass of her bedroom window, her eyes wide. She saw two police officers step out of the car. One of them carried a clipboard. The other adjusted his cap and walked toward Mr. Harris's front door. Inside, Mr. Harris heard the knock. At first, he thought he imagined it. Nobody ever came to his door except Lily. But the knock came again, firmer this time. Setting his cup down with trembling hands, he pushed himself up with the help of his cane and shuffled to the door. When he opened it, the sight of two uniformed officers standing on his porch made his heart skip. He clutched the frame for balance. "Good morning," he said cautiously, his voice uncertain. "Good morning, sir," one officer replied politely. "Are you Mr. Thomas Harris?" "Yes, I am," he said, his throat suddenly dry. "Is something wrong?" The officer glanced at the clipboard, then back at him. "We received a call. A welfare check. May we come inside?" Mr. Harris blinked in confusion. "A welfare check?" He stepped aside slowly, letting them in. Of course, please. Come in." The officers walked into the living room, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. They looked around. At the dusty shelves, the faded photographs, the piano in the corner, and the colorful drawings scattered across the table. One of them paused, staring at the childlike card that read, "Happy birthday, Mr. Harris," with bright stars and hearts. "Do you live alone, sir?" the taller officer asked. "Yes," Mr. Harris said carefully. "I've lived alone for many years. Any visitors lately?" the officer asked, his tone not unkind but steady. Mr. Harris hesitated. His eyes fell on the card again, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. "Yes," he admitted softly. "A little girl. From across the street. She came yesterday. She made me a card. She was kind to me." The officers exchanged a quick glance. Outside, Lily had darted out of her house the moment she saw the police arrive. Her mother called after her, but she ran across the yard and hid behind the bushes near his fence, her small heart pounding. She didn't understand what was happening, but the sight of the flashing lights and serious officers made her nervous. Through the window, she saw them talking to Mr. Harris, their expressions unreadable. Her little hands clenched tightly into fists. Inside, the questions continued. "Sir, we received a report that you may not be well," the officer explained gently. "Neighbors were concerned. They said no one visits you. Some feared something might have happened." Mr. Harris lowered himself into his chair, his cane resting beside him. He chuckled softly, though his laugh was thin and tired. "Well, they weren't wrong. Nothing has happened, except a little girl knocking on my door." He looked toward the window with softened eyes, almost as if he knew Lily was there. "And for once I wasn't alone." The officer studied him for a long moment. He looked frail, yes. His skin pale, his frame thin. His house carried the air of years lived quietly, almost forgotten. But his eyes carried life again. "Are you sure you're all right, sir?" one officer asked kindly. "Yes," Mr. Harris said firmly. "I am better than I've been in a long time." The officers nodded, reassured. They made a few notes, checked the house briefly, and then prepared to leave. "If you ever need help, sir, please don't hesitate to call," one of them said. "Thank you," Mr. Harris replied softly. As they walked back to their car, Lily dashed from her hiding spot and ran up to the porch. "Mr. Harris," she whispered breathlessly. "Are you okay? Why were the police here?" He bent down slowly, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm all right, Lily. They just wanted to make sure I was safe." Her eyes searched his face, anxious. "You scared me," he smiled faintly. "And you cared enough to be scared. That means more to me than you know." The police car pulled away, its sirens off now, leaving the street in silence once more. Neighbors who had been peeking from their windows slowly turned away, though whispers still lingered. For most of them, it was just a brief event to gossip about. But for Lily and Mr. Harris, it was something more. It was a reminder. Life was fragile, uncertain, and often watched by others who didn't truly understand. Yet in that fragile space, they had found each other. That night, as Mr. Harris sat once more in his chair, Lily's card still on the table, he thought about how strange life was. The world could forget you, overlook you, even assume the worst about you. But then in the middle of all that, one small person could walk in and remind you of your worth. And though the police had left, the knock on the door still echoed in his heart. A reminder that change, both good and bad, always came when least expected. The sun rose slowly the next morning, but for Lily the world felt brighter than ever. She woke with a bounce in her step, already planning what she would say to Mr. Harris when she saw him. She had drawn a new picture late last night, one of the two of them sitting by the piano, their smiles big and wide. Across the top she had written, "Best friends forever." She couldn't wait to show him. She hurried through breakfast, hardly touching her toast. Her mother smiled at her excitement, though a small worry tugged at her heart. Children could become attached so quickly, and she wondered if this bond was something that might end too soon. Still, she said nothing and kissed Lily's forehead before letting her rush out the door with her drawing in hand. Days passed, but the street still felt different. For years, the little house at the end had been overlooked. Just another building, old and quiet, tucked away from the busyness of life. But now people noticed it. They noticed it because of what had happened, and because of the small girl who had cared enough to step inside when no one else did. For Lily, the world seemed quieter too. The porch across the street remained empty. The curtains never moved. The chair by the window where she had so often seen Mr. Harris sit with his tea now stood abandoned. She felt the emptiness every time she looked at it. It wasn't just that he was gone. It was the way he had gone so soon after she had found him, as if life had played a cruel trick. But even through her sadness, something inside her had changed. She was only 8 years old, yet she had learned something many adults never understood, that kindness, even in its smallest form, could leave the deepest mark. One evening, as she sat with her parents at dinner, she finally spoke. "Mom, Dad, I think Mr. Harris was waiting." Her father looked up from his plate. "Waiting? Waiting for what, sweetheart?" "For someone to notice him," she said softly. "For someone to remind him he wasn't invisible. I think he was waiting for me." Her mother's eyes filled with tears and she reached out to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Maybe you're right. And maybe that's why he smiled so much those last days. You gave him something no one else could." Lily nodded, her voice firm in its innocence. "I don't think he was lonely when he went, because he knew he had a friend." After that, Lily carried her drawings everywhere. She drew not just for fun, but with purpose. She started making cards for her teachers, for her classmates, for the older lady who lived 3 doors down, even for the mailman who always seemed tired. She wrote little notes with them. "Thank you, you're special, I'm glad you're here." She never told anyone why she had started doing it, but in her heart, she knew it was because of Mr. Harris. Her parents began to notice the ripple effect. Neighbors who once barely spoke to each other started stopping on the street to chat. Some even admitted they regretted never reaching out to the old man while he was alive. The little girl's friendship with him had opened their eyes. They realized how many people lived quietly, unseen, right beside them. And so kindness spread, not through grand gestures or big events, but through simple acts. A wave at the neighbor mowing his lawn. A plate of cookies dropped off at the door of the widow who lived alone. A smile offered to a stranger at the store. The street slowly changed because one child had dared to cross the road and knock on a lonely man's door. For Lily, the memory of Mr. Harris never faded. She kept the card he had treasured, the one she made for his birthday, taped above her bed. Some nights when she missed him the most, she would whisper, "Good night, Mr. Harris," before drifting to sleep. She imagined he could hear her somehow, smiling wherever he was. Years later, when she grew older, she often told the story to her friends. Not just as a sad tale of loss, but as a lesson. She told them about the quiet man who had lived alone, the man who seemed invisible to everyone but her, and how a simple dinner, a slice of cake, and a laugh had changed his final days. "He wasn't just the old man at the end of the street," she would say. "He was my friend, and he taught me that kindness matters, even if you think it's small." And in telling his story, she kept him alive. For Mr. Harris, his life had ended quietly, but not in loneliness. Because of a little girl's courage to care, he left this world with joy in his heart. His final birthday had not been forgotten. It had been celebrated with the laughter of a child, the music of a piano, and the priceless gift of companionship. And for Lily, she carried his memory as a guiding star. Whenever she saw someone sitting alone, Whenever she noticed someone being left out or ignored, she remembered him. She remembered the flicker of that candle on his cake, the way his eyes lit up when she called him her friend, and the way he had whispered, "Best birthday ever." Life moved on, as it always does.
Neighbors came and went, the seasons changed, and the house at the end of the street was eventually sold.
But for those who had witnessed it, and especially for Lily, the story remained a quiet reminder that sometimes the greatest impact you can make is not through wealth, fame, or power, but through love given freely to someone who needs it most. And so, the lesson lived on. Never underestimate the power of noticing someone. Never assume that small acts don't matter, because sometimes to one person your kindness can mean the world. Mr. Harris had left with peace. Lily had grown with wisdom, and the bond they shared, however brief, had become something eternal.